All right, today I'm joined by Jade Scherr, founder and CEO of HexaHive. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'd like to just kind of get started with take me back to kind of where you were pre HexaHive and what were the thoughts and ideas that
Boy.
led to you starting it? And then looking back on it now, like what's surprised you the most about being an agency owner?
Yeah, okay, you might need to remind me later on of the second part of the question because how it got started, I could do a short overview, but that's not as fun. Really, how it got started, I was going to be a lawyer, totally different path. Obviously, I'm not doing that now, owning an agency, but I was really good at school. I say that trying not to be arrogant. I was good at taking tests. So I graduated when I was 16. I had this whole plan. I was going to go to law school, had this vision, all of that. And then when I'm 17, I find out that I'm pregnant. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, I don't want to be a single mom and a lawyer. What do I do? Immediate answer was not to start a marketing agency. But I started thinking of like, what else do I like? What am I good at? And I had always been complimented on like how good I was with art. And so I was like, maybe I'll try graphic design. Total different path, but I was like, let's see. And when I got into that, I loved it, but I felt like so many people were making things pretty that didn't have a purpose. And I was like, what is the greater purpose of all of this? And so in that process, I really found a passion for marketing. And so continued my degree from graphic design onto marketing. And really in all of that, I wanted to get a ton of experience. I wanted to show my daughter, you can do anything you put your mind to. And so with that, started taking on all of these freelance projects. At the same time, I'm working in corporate, in design and marketing, having lots of fun, and kind of got to this headway where I was like, I got to decide which path do I want to go? Everyone here told me you have golden handcuffs because I had a great job with a great pension. They were wonderful to me. Like, I have no complaints there aside from I was like, I just love helping businesses. I love getting to meet with them and help them see not only like, yeah, we could do this campaign, but it's like, what's the point of it? And so in anything that I do, that's where I was like, I just want to help people figure out not just how to have a website or how to rebrand, but like, is that what they need to be doing in the first place? And so in that process, I didn't want to start my own business. That was not my first choice. But I looked at what I was like, I love the concept of working in an agency. I live in North Dakota, so there's like two agencies here. um, Not a lot of competition. But so I looked at them and I was like, would I want to work at either of these? Ultimately came to the conclusion that I was like, I have these side clients, I have these things. Let's just do it and figure it out. But I never intended for it to be an agency right away. And so then launched HexaHive and I was like, okay, it's just going to be me for the long haul. Cause at this point, I'm 23. And so still young. And I'm like, I don't know how to run a business. I just love helping other businesses. But next thing I know, I have a ton of clients. I've grown through referrals and I'm like, I need to get a team. And so kind of bit the bullet. And from there, once I decided to hire full time, just grew from that. And so now we have a team of 8 and it's really just blossomed.
Wow. Amazing. That's why like looking back on it, like or in the moment you never know it's gonna work out, but looking back, you realize like all the pieces fell perfectly in place with probably
Yeah.
exactly where you needed to be. And
And
it
like everything
unbeknownst
is
to you,
always a
everyone knows.
risk, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's really just guiding like everything is a risk. Like there's a risk in staying in a job in a corporate job and then still having the risk that you could be let go because of not even because of your work or what your output was, but because of macro level decisions that are out of your
Mhm.
control. So there's always risk in every path. It just comes down to I think really what you kind of got out was like what's the real purpose that you want to strive for and what you really want to do that you're passionate about and I think passion's been this whole like do you chase your passion or do you chase what's the right thing to do but at the end of the day I think you found out who you want to serve and I think that's like the most valuable aspect of working within a business or on your own business is like who do you want to serve and you figured out who you wanted to serve and you chase that and that created opportunities.
Yeah, one of the things I always ask myself is like, what would I regret doing this? But then would I regret not doing this?
Right.
And so I'm like, I don't want to live with different regrets. And so even when starting HexaHive, I was like, worst case, I always like to go to worst case scenario. I'm like, worst case, absolutely fail, and I go and get a normal person job. That doesn't sound that bad. Like, aside from having to swallow my pride, maybe, like, that's figure outable and that's very doable. But then it's like, okay, would I regret this or not? And then is this helping other people? That's how I make decisions both in the agency day to day of like if we're looking to explore something and I'm like, would I regret not doing it? Is this aligned with our priorities? And it makes making decisions so much easier because the biggest thing that I've learned is like learn as you go. Don't wait for perfection. Don't wait for the perfect timing. A lot of our competition has been around for 30, 40 years. And so I felt right away there was like this big intimidation factor. But now we've built a name for like being innovative, for standing out because we're not stuck in how we're doing things. And they still do good work. It's just they approach it different and they change at a different pace than we do. And that's been one of the ways that we've been able to differentiate ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second part of that question was, what have you
Yeah.
been surprised by building this agency? Because you kind of went into it a bit reluctantly, right? Like you
Mhm.
went into it like not really like this wasn't your number one goal. It's like I want to build an agency, but you kind of built it out of a need to continue to serve the clientele you wanted to serve. But what's surprised you that maybe like in a good or maybe a bad way that looking back on now you weren't expecting when you started?
Yeah, I would say that it's not about the work so much as it is about the communication and the people skills and the relationships. So there you can be a really really talented agency and do really solid technical work, but if you can't communicate your ideas, if you can't build strong client relationships and you have clients constantly leaving, you're never gonna go anywhere, and so I talk with my team about that all the time of it's not just doing good work, it's how do you convey your ideas? How do you help clients feel heard? And so I think for me, that's been one of the most surprising pieces is like, I love the people aspect of what we do, and that's how we've been able to grow so much is that our clients truly like one of them that we met with yesterday, they trust us so much. They don't even need to know the specifics. They're like, "We don't wanna talk through that. We trust you. We just want you to hear our ideas." And then they trust that we're going to take that and we're gonna move that forward in the way that like we see fit. And so they don't need to have all the checks and balances and other pieces because we built that relationship. And that allows us to go from like doing marketing deliverables to doing really impactful work that's actually helping them grow their business, that's helping them move the needle. And so I think a lot of it, like I started in this industry because I liked the work and now I love the people and the relationship piece. And I think that's how you make really exponential impact is when you double down on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you really have to have that trust built in with your clients and with your team, and that trust builds the foundation to where you can really continue to build on and actually get good work done. Otherwise, you're kind of in this churn, and I've seen it on the advertiser side where they just continue to chase new agencies, and you can never get past that initial just setup phase. Is that if you're
Mhm.
always going back forth and rebuilding the setup, is that how do you build the layers on your marketing campaign? I think you need one solid agency that has really built-in trust because you work almost like a coworker. Like it's this
Mhm.
closest thing to like an employee coworker type of relationship is a really good agency partnership with a brand.
Well, and as you know, the setup phase is a lot of work. Like, there's a lot that goes into that, and so then if you lose that, then you're just constantly repeating, and then as an agency, it's hard to sustain then. So that's where over time saw where I'm like, I don't want to just do projects. I want long-term marketing partnerships, and that's where we put our focus is like we're a strategic partner to businesses, so we help them figure out what should they be doing. There have been so many that have come to us spending half $500,000 on advertising and they're like, "I don't know what we're getting from it, but I'm scared to cut it and see what like in case something bad would happen." And it's like we can't be letting fear make our decisions, but that's how so many businesses operate with marketing is that they add a little bit more here and here and here, hoping that stuff happens. Next thing you know, you're spending a lot and it should be an investment, not a spend. And so it's like, how can we step back and look at the bigger purpose? And that's where we come in and then partner with them long haul to like bring all of that to life, doing all the traditional agency things but I always tell people, I'm like, if you want an agency that just does as you say and delivers on the marketing that you want, like there's probably other more affordable options than us because that's not what we're here for. You're paying for someone to push back, you're paying for someone to guide you. And I think that's part of like with agencies, you need to know what is your value that you're offering because sometimes people don't need what we're offering. Like they really just need an agency that will run their SEO or run their ads, and that's it. And that's great. There's a different agency for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like something else you talked about and discussed before is like a surface fix versus a foundational fix. Like, could you explain kind of what have you experienced through your agency and with clients of where different brands are at between
Yeah.
those?
So I think one of the most common like surface fixes that people reach out to us for is websites. We get so many inquiries every month for wanting a new website. And then when we start talking with them, it's like, well, why? And they're like, well, we want more sales. And so our website's going to do that. And it's like, well, how are people going to get there? What's that going to look like? And so I think that's one example of like, there's a lot of marketing that's not tangible where like you need to know the purpose of what you're doing and where you're going for the rest of it to make sense. And so if you think of it like a dartboard, where foundation is figuring out where is the dartboard in the first place. Otherwise, you're throwing darts and you could be facing the opposite wall. You could be the wrong direction and it's never going to stick. But if you don't even know what you're trying to do, you're just blindly throwing, shooting. And so you're never going to be successful because you don't know what success is in the first place and then you don't know where you're going. And so I think that's one of like the harder concepts for people to understand, especially with strategy, is that a lot of that foundation piece is we just need to first define what is success, where are we going, what's the point of this, how are you different, and do that. And then the goal that we try and have is how do we pilot that as quickly as possible? Not in the sense of rushing things, but everything's made up. I love that about marketing. Like we're all just learning as we go, and that's the point, is that we wanna push the bounds, we wanna think different, and that doesn't mean that it's gonna land 100% every time, but if you spend 9 months working on something and have never piloted it, you are putting a lot of eggs in one basket, and so instead, it's how do we experiment, test this here, and then build on it, see if it worked well or not, expand from there, but first starting with where are we going, and then how do we start going as quickly as possible so that we can build up to that greater purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. We see it so many times with brands that want to run paid ads, and we're down the tactical funnel. Like we are
Yeah.
a tactical specific agency that we execute paid ads only. But so many brands will come to us with a desire to run ads because they want the traffic, but oftentimes
Mhm.
they won't have the foundation built in that we call like paid ads is really gasoline on a fire is that but you have to have the fire started and set up right in order to really scale which is you have to know exactly what your offer is, you have to know who your avatar is that you're going
Mhm.
after, you have to know what your problems you're solving for, what are you have to have a good funnel, a good email follow-up system, you have to have all of this foundation built in and then you can start driving traffic. But I think so many times people skip the strategy piece and go straight
Yeah.
to the tactics. So how have you kind of helped clients pull the reins back and
Mhm.
refocus on we have to build the strategy first before we go to all these tactics?
I think sometimes it's as simple as doing analogies like you just said of the fuel and the fire. I think of this weekend. We have a lake cabin and it had rained a ton. My kids wanted to make s'mores. And to your point of like ads are it like fuel to the fire. So the fire pit is soaking wet. The wood's all wet. We had to work really, really, really hard to get that going and it was not easy. And so sometimes it's really educating and walking back with clients in ways that they understand. And so I often am relating it back to like completely unrelated real world examples like that because strategy because it is something that like is mostly what you're thinking. It's deciding which approach that you're going. It's really retraining how people think. Marketing used to be all about like, what can we push out there? What can we get out there? And now, because AI and technology is making it so easy to have mass content, it's less about that and more about how do we educate our clients about the purpose of what we're doing. And so I think more and more where we see success with it isn't in doing some big, beautiful strategy in itself, but it's how do we explain it in ways that our clients understand and in ways where they're able to see, oh, that makes sense. That's why we need to focus on it. And so when it comes to how we approach doing that, We often will find a balance of like, what are the quick wins where we can build trust with them, especially if it's a new client. Most of our clients now are ongoing where we only accept new clients occasionally, but right away it's that big trust building phase. And so call it quick wins of like, what are those tangible things where we can show them, they can take it back to their leadership team, and really goes back to for us understanding what do they care about? Because once you've built that trust, then they're going to believe in the strategy that you give. And so an example of that is we're working with a bank. They have 18 locations across 2 states, and, they hired us after working with a different agency for over 20 years. And so, right away, we were concerned of, like, what's the trust level going to be at for that? But we sat down with them, and one of the most valuable things that we do is we just listen for 3 hours. We asked them a couple questions and just listened, and after that, we drafted a strategy and they were like, "Yeah, we trust you guys. We felt heard. This reflects it." And everything else was smooth sailing from there. But anytime that we started with trying to pitch before listening, it doesn't work out. And so I think that too often agencies complicate it, but it's like clients want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. If you start there and then communicate why behind the strategy, you're going to be able to get past that initial phase and be able to focus on the foundation, and they'll understand that this takes time. And so in that instance, they had said too, they're like, I think we need to increase our partnership and we need to extend how long this is going to take because, like, this is a big thing. And that's great when clients say, we want to pay you more money over more time. And that was like, that didn't come from being pushy, that came from repeating back what they said and instead helping guide them. And so that's where we focus on being a guide, and I think that's where we see the most success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power of listening and
Mhm.
being heard, like, I think everybody just wants to be heard regardless, like, business, professional, like, people just wanna be heard and understood that their problems and their issues are being met and being solved for. And it's not I think everybody realizes, like, it's not gonna be perfect right out the gate, and it's gonna be a work in progress, but communicating back to them of, like, "We hear you, we understand where you're at, and this is a plan." I think that solves so many problems that so many agencies don't do a good job at because I think this is a very common B2B problem where they continue to just talk about yourself and your own business and the services that you do rather than listening to what your customer actually needs and then meeting them where they're at. Did that kind of take time to develop that strategy or approach, or did that just come kind of innate and natural to you?
I think that came more naturally because a lot of people think I'm really extroverted, but I'm actually really introverted. So I naturally ask a lot of questions. And so I didn't realize that that was like unique until I started hearing a lot of feedback on that. And then because of that, hired people that are naturally curious too. That's one of our core values. And so want people that are curious that don't just hear something and take it at surface value and instead are looking at like the deeper purpose. And so I think that partially is like who we are as a company, but started with like just kind of my personality too.
Yeah. And so you guys offer brand services, web design services, marketing services. Did you offer those right out the gate from the beginning, or have you just kind of continued to add on services? I'm always just curious how agencies build. Do you build out kind of a core service and then grow your horizontally through other services as clients demand? Kind of what was your approach to growing into all these different services and how you maintain them?
Yeah, I probably should have been more intentional upfront. But because I was learning as I go, it really started with like I grew mainly through referrals. So I told different people in my network, like, hey, this is the type of work that I like doing. I want to get experience. And that started even before I had started HexaHive. And so that just, when people would come to me with a project, I was like, can figure this out? Can I do this or not? And from my like corporate experience, I was able to get my hands in a lot of different things. So I had kind of broad generalist experience. So that's where the first couple years were really figuring out like, where do we offer the most value? What do I do the best work at? What does my team do the best work at? And kind of fine tuning from there. In 2023, we hit a point where I read the book The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz. If you haven't read it, it's so good. But it talks about how like you need to run your business like a pumpkin farmer. And weed off the unhealthy ones, the small ones, and looked, and we had a ton of small clients. And it was from ones that like were from pre-HexaHive, from like my freelance clients that then joined and started and weeded off, and we ended up firing about half of our clients. And that was a big scary change at that point because most of them were things like social media management, and very, like, entry level services where I was like, for us to be recognized at that point that strategy was our differentiator. And so I was like, for us to be able to charge what we need to charge, this just doesn't make sense for them. And so met with each of them and talked through. And that's when we really started to get more intentional with we're strategy first, everything else second. And so with that, while we are a full service agency, we outsource different pieces so that we're able to stay specialized in the strategy piece of what we do best and kind of treat it where it's like our clients trust us. And so we bring in the right partners for some of those more technical things. And we communicate that and are transparent on that. And that's where it's been a little bit of that learning over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the important way to grow is like really figure out what your core services are and then grow and scale around that. And the only way to really scale as an agency in terms of revenue is either you continue to stack on many clients or you go up to service
Mhm.
higher value clients that will pay more. So then you can increase revenue. But I really only see those are like the two most fundamental ways that and maybe expanding services to an existing client, but then you're really just expanding your revenue per client. But as you've grown, so demand is always kind of needs to be balanced out by supply. So you have to like your demand of clients and customers coming in and then your supply. And I know from experience that's like always one of the most challenging aspects of running an agency is how you balance those two and keep them in equilibrium. You don't want to have too much team and not enough work, and you also don't want to have way too much work and not enough team. How you've kind of balanced growing that? I know you said you just kind of looked at
Mhm.
you did like an 80/20 analysis, remove clients that weren't serving, but any other approaches you've grown to growing the agency?
I think one of the most helpful switches that we've made is that we focus really heavily on retainer partnerships. So our goal is to keep them forever until like unless there becomes a level of us moving up to another level. But that makes it where like we have predictable income for the rest of the year. We're able to focus on servicing them well. And we find that like that's where we do the best work too, is we put a lot of effort into that initial setup phase of getting to know clients. And so with a project, we would do that, and then it ends, and it's like, well, maybe we'll get it again if they do another campaign, but wha there was a lot of, like, opportunity costs that we'd lose each time in that, and so now we're really selective if we do take a start and stop project, but otherwise, the focus is on being that ongoing partner, and we're at a really unique spot where we're not actively trying to grow, so we can be really intentional and selective, and when you do that, I feel like you naturally get better leads too. So, like, there are several that we're talking to now where it's like, because we're not having to chase them, they see that too, and they're the ones pursuing us instead and are like, "What can we do to work with you? How does this go?" And it's like, "Yeah, well, our capacity, like, we wanna be really intentional and serve our clients well, so we can until probably October." And they're like, "Okay, fine. Like, what do we need to do right now to get that locked in?" And that's a really good spot to be, and that took time too, because I felt this pressure to grow, and I'm someone who, like, I'm an achiever. I like checking things, I like moving forward, I like tangible progress, and it was, like, a year and a half ago where I was like, "What are we growing for?" Like, I'm growing in having more people to manage, more personalities, more things, and I felt like I had more management headaches than anything else. And so we started intentionally kind of downsizing our team. And I like just kept looking at like, how do we simplify? How do we simplify? And I didn't want to do layoffs or anything like that because it also wasn't a need like that. But a few things fell into place where one person left and it was like, okay, let's not fill that and let's do this instead and started shifting. And in that, now it's like, we went from a team of 12 down to 8 now, and I feel really, really good about that. We're more profitable, we're more strong and where we're moving forward, and we're working with clients that we're more happy about because 'cause we're not just trying to, like, get new ones so that we have enough work. And so for me, it was having to also get past like employee count isn't the metric for success.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
outward pieces that other people see, because at least locally, it's like people are like, "What do you do? How big's your team?" And then they're like, "Oh, that's awesome." And it's moving past all of that to like, we want to do the best work possible. Our goal is to set the standard for marketing in North Dakota. And so, how can we keep our focus on that and have fun doing that and not just grow for growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the best things about having your own agency is that you get to dictate the goals and the expectations of where you want to grow, what you want to do. Because like if you're working within an agency, you're kind of bound to the expectations and the goals of whoever's running that agency. But since you run your own agency, you get to decide like are we just chasing our own tail of just
Mhm.
continuing trying to grow for growth's sake, or are we happy and content with where we're at and growing more methodically? And I think through doing that, like you said, is you're attracting higher value customers because you've really building in true scarcity, which is probably an underutilized tactic. The agencies don't use that. All agencies fundamentally are scarcity, limited in terms of how much demand they can take on because they're a service based business and they only can handle as much as their people can produce. And so every agency fundamentally right now has a maximum amount of demand and new clients they can take on. And using that as like a weapon for, you know, communicating to potential clients that we only can take on one, maybe two per quarter. And then that creates new opportunity. So I think the way you're building and structuring it is awesome because you're doing it exactly the way you want to do it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am like, so North Dakota is a farming state. So I often will reference that like people treat marketing and really any service based industry like a commodity. You
Yeah.
naturally go to
Yeah.
like, how do I get the cheapest thing possible? How do
Right.
I get it at the cheapest price? And there's such a shift now that I see needing to happen. And that's where like always go back to communication and education a little bit too, because it's like if we treat it like a commodity, others are going to also. And so it's our responsibility as people in the industry to help people understand because similarly, I don't know, like I had a contractor come to my house and they gave a quote and I was like, "Holy smokes, that's expensive." And then when they explained it, I'm like, "Yeah," because 'cause I'm like, "I have no clue how to do that." You get sticker shock right away, though, and that's where you need to be able to explain the position and value, and I think that's good that agencies need to be able to do that, because there are times where we don't give a bid on a project or working with a client when it's like, "I don't see the value in this, and I don't wanna put our name on something that I don't see the value in." And there have been some times where they're like, "This is grant money, we don't care, like, just help us," and then it's like, okay, what? But we want to work on things where there's the value there. And that's where like getting into more value based pricing when you talk about like how does an agency grow, I think that's the direction things are needing to move more because something can take me an hour that takes someone else 12 hours. So how do you decide what to charge for it?
Right. Exactly. Especially as we kind of evolve in this whole technology is so rapid and so accessible for all knowledge with the use of agentic
Mhm.
agents and LLMs and AI and everything is that the value is no longer going to be in terms of hours. And I think the whole agency model, billable hours, is going to flip because what used to take 5, 6, 7, 8 hours is going to start taking one. But the value is still there because it took all of my 10 plus years of agency expertise and knowledge in terms of how to do whatever strategy or execution piece that I can do in an hour now that you wouldn't be able to do in an hour with the same tools. And I think that's the big difference that a lot of people aren't recognizing is there's all this fear, concern, like, oh, AI is going to be able to replace so many of these things to a certain extent, but somebody who's a novice who doesn't know how to do something is not going to know the difference between a good output and a bad output, and you can get a lot of bad outputs from these LLMs.
And you need to know what output you want in the first place, too. And so marketing's about thinking different, about making things stick, about doing things that are memorable. And so when you think of AI, it's like it is a great tool when you give it direction and guidance. But if you're not giving it that, it's going to be more generic. It's not going to be that. And you can end up with things that are on brand, but they're going to be forgotten. And so that's where I see also the value coming in of like not just the expertise of how to set up those different pieces, but the judgment of how do we have things that have the right tactics, that have the right approach, that have the right messaging that's out of the box, and how do we use AI to help us explore options rapidly, but to use our human judgment to think of like what is the best approach based on this, not what's the safest, not what's the fastest. And that's what I'm excited about because I think that's I don't want to do any admin work. I don't wanna do entry level marketing stuff, and when people are afraid of their jobs being taken, I'm like, "That is so exciting if parts of it are taken, because it's gonna take the mundane parts. The parts where, like, nobody wants to be doing expense reports. Let's get that taken away. Let's get the parts that, like, we're not excited about so that we can focus on what does excite us, that does take human judgment, that does take creativity, and let it take the other parts. Because please."
Yep, exactly. And I think that's real going to be the big difference is with how can agencies use and leverage it to automate a lot of the lower level mundane work to focus more on human judgment and strategy, like you said. Like that is going to be the highest value output that agencies can service to brands that don't have that expertise or experience in-house to make those right decisions and understand how to use it to get whatever output or strategic thinking or creative strategy that needs to be created.
Yeah, we put a lot of focus on how do we get rid of admin work, because that's not what we're here for. And so I think a lot of people think right away of like agencies using AI to like do the campaigns for it. And it's like
Right.
there's so many other ways that you can be using it so that your time is put on where your time needs to be focused. But that's one of the key areas that we're focusing on now is like how do we eliminate the pieces that aren't in our realm, but are things that you need to do for the sake of like having to check the boxes and having to run a business and having different things required.
Yeah. It's funny because in the media buying space, the concept and ideas around AI have always been inserted for the last 10 plus years before all the demand side platforms, all the ad networks, they all just called it machine learning. Is that the algorithms would go out, learn and test gather that data and then make decisions on their own, automated to go decide who to serve ads to. And so what we always talk about is that we would no longer do those manual heavy optimizations, but it's about the machine plus human intersection. So like what do machines do really well? What do humans do well? That's what we're focused on as an agency. And we've been talking about that for 10 plus years is machine plus human optimizations and ad management. And I think that concept is now hitting almost every aspect, really, of business, but definitely every aspect of marketing and advertising services is how humans and machines kind of are working together to get the output. But I guess in a way, you could always say it because we've been using building everything with computers. Now it's just more of automated creating, but that direction, that human input and direction, is still going to be the I think the core concepts that's going to be the differentiator between agencies that get a good output versus agencies that don't.
And I think like you said, we've had AI around for a long time. It's just now you have it where like everyday people have it at their fingertips more easily to be able to give it input. But I often will remind people of like, you know, how Netflix gives you suggestions of what you should watch? That's AI. How Google, when you start typing, how things pop up? That's AI. And it's just helping, I think, get past that initial fear that people have. But I also will tell people, I'm like, technology doesn't typically lessen, it doesn't go away. So, like, when cars came out, people thought it was crazy. And they're like, that's so unsafe. Nobody's going to do that. They're expensive. This is a death trap. You don't see people riding their horse to work anymore. Like, you're not going around traveling like that. If it would, it'd be a talking point, and it's unreasonable now. And so it's like to the same point, AI is not going to become less and less. It's either going to stay the same or increase a little bit. And so let's stop pretending like it's not going to be here and see how do we use it in responsible ways that help us do better work.
Absolutely. I think there's only one town left in the US that doesn't allow cars, and they're still running horses somewhere in Michigan, I think it
I
is.
love that
But
you know that. You get my point though.
yeah, 100%. 100%. Like, there, you just know, well, like, what's funny is I heard someone else say this was like, there's still some companies out there that are still doing millions in revenue every year. They don't have a website, they have no online presence, nothing, right? And we think that in the modern age, you have to have a website, you have to have a social media presence, you have to have all these things in order to operate a business. And I think it's funny is that they're all on a spectrum of what technology you want to use to scale your business,
Mhm.
and really help get a better output or a different output. But you could operate right now. An agency can operate without using AI.
Mhm.
I just think the ones that will figure out how to insert it into their workflow, and that doesn't mean it takes over everything. I think its majority is going to be or AI assisted output, but those ones are going to have a significant advantage over an agency that doesn't use it at all. And I think that's gonna be the big difference is if you're completely rejecting it, you're gonna be left behind in some aspect.
I think of it too, like, there are some businesses that, like, also don't need to do marketing. And I tell them, I'm like, "That's great. Good for you. Like, I'm not gonna push it on you." But most businesses aren't at that point. Like, they need more business or they need staff. And so they need to have an online presence. And so you don't have to do anything, but like the businesses that don't need marketing are the ones that put in the work on relationships typically. They have the reputation with the people that need to know them, and that's why they don't need to have a strong online presence. We were talking with an energy company, and they only have, like, 1 client that buys energy from them, so they're like, "What do we need this foundation for?" And I'm like, "Well, lawmakers are the ones that, like, are impacting your regulations, so, like, I would wanna see how you're showing up and what you look like for them. Because no, you don't need it for your one customer, but, like, who are the other people involved?" And I think all of that, again, goes back to the strategy of, like, how are we thinking about things, but let's not put a cookie cutter solution of everyone needs to do this thing. And I think sometimes for agencies, in the sake of service packages, you can go too quick to like give this, here's what we do, but recognize not every business is the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Really meeting a customer where they're at and what they need. That's such an like, unique, like, strategy of, like, you don't need to reach your existing customer. This is who you actually need to reach. I think it's like a fundamental strategy decision. It's like, who is your real avatar that you need to influence and start there. Um, that's great. Last question for you. If you could give yourself one piece of advice when you're starting your agency out, what would it be?
Trust your gut. I think of there are only a few things where like I don't truly have regrets about anything because I think that anything's a lesson learned. But the times where things have not gone the way that like I wanted or that blew up in my face were times where I was like I listened to other people and I didn't trust my gut. I saw red flags and I ignored them. And so that would be my biggest advice to myself, but to anyone too. Deep down, we know what decision is best. And that's also why it's so important to surround yourself with mentors, coaches, people that you want to be like, because then that's going to improve your intuition, improve your gut. But really leaning into that, I would say.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much, Jade.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.